Boker Tov. It's actually 7:45 Thursday morning. And for those of you that wax nostalgic about your dorm rooms during college years, let me remind you, this is what you were living in for 4 years. And this is a nice one. It's okay. Hi from Nazareth University in Rochester, New York, where I have been since Tuesday with a conference of folks from many different faiths. Usually this is an international conference. It still is. But unfortunately, we're very sad because of the political situations in our world and the political chaos created in our own country that none of our international partners are here physically. Some of them have Zoomed in to present their scholarly work, but those of us that have been here always enjoy each other's fellowship, each other's company, each other's intelligence. We share our pain, we share our hopes, we share our fears, we share our work that we are doing to try to repair our very fractured world. And that is a very special place to be. So, hi everyone. We begin this week with our fourth Sefer of the Torah, Sefer BaMidbar, in the desert. And one of the things that I've been doing this year is focusing on God, finding God in our lives. The title of this week's talk is Finding God in the Deserts of Our Lives. And as I was reminded yesterday by a lovely colleague, Rabbi Isaiah Rothstein, one of the things that makes the midbar, the desert, is that there are many stories here about who's in, who's out, who's included, who's not, who hurts the other one and tries to malign them, and what the consequences are. And that is a very painful reality for our world. And coming together in this group of scholars of religion and texts and application of them. This year, the theme was race and xenophobia. Encourages me and gives me chuzuk, gives me strength to go on and to continue in my work when I ask myself, are we really doing anything to make a difference? And I know we all collectively are, but sometimes it's just hard. It's just hard. So last year, for this Parsha, I focused on the beauty and the opportunities presented to us by deserts. They are not, as we might think, empty and void of inspiration, but rather they present us with an environment in which we are challenged to find inspiration and so many opportunities, perhaps without the too many distractions that accompany our high-tech lives today. I want to continue and expand upon that by considering the presence of God in the deserts of our lives. I am thinking, for example, of the many groups that go on retreat, as I referred last year, to find a peaceful place where they can focus on themselves, on their health, and of course, we can focus on God in the very place that may only bear the imprint of God's work and art of creation. Here we begin our fourth book of our Torah, BaMidbar, as follows, with taking an account of all who are present in the desert, ready for this next chapter of their collective as well as individual journeys. God spoke to Moshe in the Sinai desert in the tent of meeting on the first day of the second month of the second year after their exodus from Egypt, saying, Su'u et rosh kol adat b'nei Yisrael mishpachoteim lebet avotam b'mispar shemot kol zachar legalgotam. Take a census of the entire community by families, by their paternal leads, because that was a form of organization. We're not going to go into gender exclusion here. It has to do with their organizational structure by the number of their names. And we then go on and we identify those that are fit to serve in the army to defend the camps. There must be one leader, one man from each tribe, the one who is the head of their paternal house. Look at all that is being done here in these 4 short verses. They have left Mitzrayim, A census is to be taken and an army formed, as well as a proper representative form of government. This is all being addressed in the desert. One might imagine that in considering the Erev Rav, the mixed multitudes that have left Mitzrayim, here the encampment of the Bnei Yisrael is specifically identified, organized, and set for the next part of their collective journey. We learn further that all was done as instructed, and this again is that pismon, that refrain that keeps appearing in our text. Kasher tzivah Hashem et Moshe v'avkidam BaMidbar Sinai. Just as God commanded Moshe, so did he count them in the Sinai desert. So many have asked, why did God give the Torah in the desert? Well, first of all, everything was desert. We know that. There were encampments, there were arranged parts, but we did not have, it wasn't Manhattan, guys, or Tel Aviv for that matter. What lessons can be found in this choice? We are already quite familiar with the many teachings of how God came down over this humble mountain and gave God's Torah here. But it is certainly fair to think that such an important event as the giving of our holy Torah should be done in an elevated space. Would it not have been more significant, for example, to give the Torah on the Temple Mount, the place where Yaakov rested his head and had the vision of the ladder that was directly under the gates of heaven, under the Sharei Shamayim? Surely that was a quiet-minded place as well, and it was elevated. According to the Bretzlover Rebbe, a Bretzlover rabbi, Pinchas Winston, there's a deeper meaning here. He teaches as follows, knowing that this was not what happened. The explanation is discussed as he teaches in the Talmudic passage of Nedarim 55a, based upon the travelogue that we will find later in BaMidbar chapter 21, verses 18 to 19. The princes dug the well. The nobles of the people hollowed it with their staffs. From the desert they went to Matana, from Matana to Nachliel, from Nachliel to Bamot, v'chulei. Why does it say from the desert they went to Matana? If a person makes themselves like a desert, so here we're talking sort of in a metaphor. They're in a desert, you are a desert, abandoning himself or herself to all. Rashi says this person teaches Torah to everyone free of charge without any compensation. The Torah will then be given to him as a gift, as a matana. So we're going to take the meanings of each of the names of the places. As it says, from the desert, from the BaMidbar, and Midbar, remember, that root also talks about talking. So now we're going to matana. Our words become a gift. Since it is given to him as a gift, he will inherit it from God, Nachalo El. Nachliel, the next name of the place, as it says from Matana to Nachliel. Since he inherits this gift of Torah that comes from his words in the Midbar, from Matana to Nachliel, he will become elevated to greatness, Bamot, a bima, right? An elevation. So that's a typical Bretzlover kind of, Hasidic teaching that finds the inner meaning in words. There's clearly a process here, and it presents us with the most teachable moment and opportunity. It begins with the Bnei Yisrael doing their part by digging wells for water in the desert to sustain them as they took on their arduous and lengthy journey. This follows the notion that I have presented often in these talks, that we must do our part. We do not sit idly by while God comes to us. Rather, we must bring God into the world by our intentions, our deeds, our very being, and here, our teaching. It is only us as human beings who can do this, who can show ourselves to be deserving of such a lofty presence as God in our midst. According to Rabbi Winston, this thought is amplified as follows. This is perhaps, teaches Rabbi Winston, the reason why man, who sits at the top, man being humans, folks, earth beings, Adam, we're not gendering here, who sits at the top of the spiritual ecological chain, is referred to as the MEDABER, the one who speaks. So we have the MEDABER, BaMidbar, same shoresh, right? Daled bet resh. Got that. The mineral world, the midbar, plays little active role in bringing the world to completion, and neither does the vegetation world. Even the animal kingdom lacks free will and the ability to be a willing partner in creation. Only the human being, the MEDABER, BaMidbar, endowed with the power of speech, a function of his high-level soul, can accept or reject his divine mission. And we have to note also that we even go in our books, BaMidbar, the fourth book, to the fifth book, named Devarim, words, right? As a result, back to Rabbi Winston, it is also possible for the human being to give credit to God for their role and success, or that human being will take credit for themselves. That human being can either treat themselves like a mountain, a har, a bama, a bamot, right, a bima, or can play the role of the midbar, the desert. This is the human being's initial and most important choice that will determine whether or not God will give us the gift of Torah, turning us individually from a midbar to a medaber. However, teaches Rabbi Winston, gifts can come and go. Inheritances last forever. If a medaber remains as such, and at the same time a midbar, either the one who speaks or the one who remains in the desert, then that person will merit Torah as an inheritance. And the Torah will flow, nachal, back to those pasukim in BaMidbar, through that person, through the will of God. This will be the source of our elevation, or one's elevation, from the midbar to new heights, to the bamot, spiritually and in the eyes of others, going back to that pasuk in chapter 16. The counting of all souls, the identification of the army, the organization into troops and into tribes, is all to facilitate this elevation to new heights, as given us by that verse in chapter 21 that tells us we will go in the midbar to Matanah, from Matanah, Natliel, and from Natliel to Bamot. This will be spiritual, this will be physical, and it will be in the presence of all with whom the Bnei Yisrael will come into contact. Let's think about this in terms of an external perception and reaction in a much later narrative of BaMidbar, as Bilam looks upon Bnei Yisrael in chapter 24, Chaf Daled. V'yar Bilam ki tov be'enei Hashem levarech et Yisrael v'lo halach b'pam lekrot nachashim v'yaset et BaMidbar panav. Now remember, Bilam is sent by Balak to curse the Bnei Yisrael, but he sees that God wants him to bless Israel, so he did not go in search of omens to hurt them as he had done. But rather, what did he do? Vayaset el MIDBAR panav. He turned his face to the midbar, to the desert, raised his eyes, saw Israel dwelling, Vayara Yisrael shachen l'shvatav, vatihi alav ruach Elokim. Saw how nicely and how lovely the Bnei Yisrael were dwelling. They were modest. Their doors didn't face each other. They were kind to each other. All these things, definitely aspirational for us folks. And the Spirit of God rested upon Bilam. He takes up his parable and he says, here is the word of Bilam. These are the words that God has sent me, Ma tavu alecha Yaakov mishkanot Yisrael, which we recite, of course, every time we enter the Bet Knesset. How wonderful are your tents, Yaakov, your dwelling places, Israel. Bilam himself shows us in this particular instance how he goes from being the midbar to the medaber. And we take our marching orders from that example. Water will flow from the wells. His children will have abundant water. He will be successful. Notice the well. Notice the reaction to the organization that Bilam observes. Good city planning. Take note of the impressive nature of this desert community. Clearly, they have benefited from following all of the instructions in our Parsha, with all of its names and numbers of the tribes and the people and their assigned places and roles. God speaks to Moshe saying, and to Aharon, the Israelites must camp by each division's banner, by the insignias on the banners of their father's house, right? Diglam ba'otot levet avotam yachanu. They must encamp around the tent of meeting, the Ohel Moed. Why? Because this is the organization. This way, in which the camp is organized, they all see each other, they have access to each other while maintaining that privacy and identity as individual tribes, and they are encircling the very symbol of their collectivity. They are also supposed to encamp at a distance, an even distance from the Ohel Moed. So, in other words, not too close. There should be a little bit of a division. And also, if you think about it, any of you, this happens at this conference and in our lives. You crowd around a table, everybody wants to be together. Somebody comes along, you get a little closer, you bring in an extra chair because you want to be community. So here, it's all organized so that, as Rashi tells us, that they are able to come to the tent of meeting on Shabbat. They're not too far, and that they are close to each other. They maintain their identity as a community. So they have their organization, their distance from the Ohel Moed, while maintaining its position, the Ohel Moed, as the focal point of the community that they all have access to and can see. There is history here as well as understanding of the needs of the future, according to Rashi. All of this was part of the experience BaMidbar to elevate to the MEDABER, I would suggest. In other words, if you're living in too much isolation, you can't talk to others, you can't interact. MEDABER is all about interacting, about using words, about bringing God's words, about sharing words, all of those things that we've been doing in my conference for the past couple of days. All of this was part of the desert experience. Maintain your collectivity, be close to the center that brings you together as a group, equal access, tribal identity, group identity. On this Shabbat, before Shavuot, the point at which we always read this Parsha, we come to an understanding that we are preparing ourselves literally to perhaps put out of our minds all distractions and focus on the upcoming celebration and observance of the receiving of our Torah, the most significant linkage between us as a people and God as our creator. As the Bnei Yisrael all had equal access to the Ohel Moed, we on Shavuot should see ourselves as having equal access to God's Torah and to God's presence. I would suggest that it behooves us to think about this connection, and I will use the wisdom of Rabbi Dr. Tzvi Hirsch Weinreb to do just that. After he explains a search for just the right, precise dictionary meaning of MIDBAR, he explains as follows. This is Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Weinreb's words. Although the dictionaries I consulted did not distinguish sharply between desert and wilderness, it is the latter that rings true as the English equivalent of the Yiddish Weisternicht, an empty, confusing, and frightening wasteland. It was in this confusing, empty, and frightening wasteland that our ancestors wandered for 40 years. And it is in that wasteland that we received the Torah. Why? Why was the Torah given in this wild and chaotic terrain? And here we want to recall that a desert need not be such a wasteland. But let's go with it for a moment. Rabbi Weinreb continues. Like most questions of this sort, numerous answers have been given over the ages. I would like to share with you an answer which makes great sense to me. If one reads further than just the first verse of this week's Parsha, he discovers that although the image we may have of wilderness is one of disorder and confusion, our narrative of these opening chapters is one of order, systematic organization, access, and inclusion of all. The tribes are divided into 12 distinct units. Each one is assigned its own flag or banner, and its place in the procession through the wilderness is also precisely specified. The entire Parsha can be summarized as making order in the midst of chaos. Another way to look at ourselves, and there are so many opportunities for this, Yom Kippur, or Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, Sfirat Omer, the period that we're in right now, up to Shavuot itself, where we individually, as a group, collectively, can take ourselves from MIDBAR to MEDABER. Becoming a MEDABER helps us make sense of and find meaning in the MIDBAR. It strikes me that the ability to organize one's environment in a beneficial and orderly manner is a basic human skill that every society must possess before it can proceed toward greater cultural achievement. Rabbi Weinrab continues, having said that, we can appreciate that before the Torah could be given to the Jewish people, there was a necessary prerequisite: the establishment of a functional society in which people could get along with each other in a peaceful and productive manner and share with each other. Again, MIDBAR, MEDABER. And what do? That Pisman Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe Lemor Daber el Bnei Yisrael. We are constantly, through our words, properly used and properly executed, elevating ourselves through the matana, that gift of Torah, from that verse in chapter 21, from a midbar with its chaos and emptiness and confusion to a medaber. We have to organize. Think about in your mind, the expression, think before you speak. There's a reason for that. We don't want to amplify the midbar by our words. Rather, we want to move and elevate ourselves to the medaber. So, if we accept all this, I would submit that it is significant that in the desert, we became organized, structured, developed in a manner that would allow us to be ready to move on. This was perhaps the only way it could happen in this environment with its natural resources, but without all the confusion that obtains in our civilized lives. We will then take this Torah and use it to make order of other types of chaos that we will no doubt encounter in our lives. May Hashem bless our efforts to do so. May the coming days of Shavuot help us think about additional ways in which we can bring order and reason to the chaotic world in which we live by retreating to our own midbar, away from the distractions, so that we can elevate ourselves to the medaber, the one who through words, God inspired, can work to fix our world. At this moment in time, as we begin the last day of this wonderful conference, and I find myself amongst people who subscribe to a thinking along those lines, I pray that we all, in our fractured world, in our midbar of a life, can use our words, inspired by words of Torah, inspired by our accessibility to God, whether it was the Ohel Moed in the midbar or the Torah of Shavuot, that we can move away from the stimuli that distract and derail us and hold on to our sense of purpose, elevating ourselves individually, collectively, and globally from midbar to medaber. Shabbat Shalom and Chag Shavuot Sameach from Rochester. Nazareth University. Lehitraat. Next week, I will not be in my dorm room. See you later. Lehitraat.